Welcome to Practical Talk Time. I'm your host, Usha Kumar. Today I have with me a wonderful guest, Ilia Regini. She is a health and wellness consultant, and she's here to tell us all about healthy eating and tell us about the most nutritious food to eat and also to prepare. And also she's going to talk about spices, and let's see if we can pick her brain. So she's so full of information on these things. And I want you to join me in welcoming Ilia. Ilia Regini, welcome to my show.
Thank you very much.
How do you do today?
I'm very well, thank you.
I know that you just recently did a 1-hour live show with Sandra Robel for this Practical Talk Time. And the both of you discussed so many good pointers, in terms of food,
Yes.
the healthy ones to eat, and what people are doing wrong in picking their food. And I want to ask you something, more personal. I want to know how you got into this field of consulting on health and on food.
I really have to say that I think it was in the cards, because when I was 20 years old, I would get this vision that I would see a white building, and I never really knew what it meant, and it had something to do with a spa. And I would find myself saying, spa? I don't know anything about a spa. What does that mean? And I would get these thoughts about thinking about nutrition and thinking about maybe nutrition school. I said, I don't know what that's all about. I'm foreign language and, the avenue I'm going to go. And all these years later, the seeds were there. The seeds were there. I think it was meant to be.
When was that? How old were you?
I was about 20.
At the time when you dreamt of a spa?
Yes.
And you wanted to have a spa yourself?
Well, I'll tell you
create
something.
one?
I've always been a person that always enjoyed taking care of my body. And I don't know why or why that was, but I always did. Polished and dry brushing and massage and aromatherapy oils.
You have a great skin. I can see that. And you look very healthy. And is it because of healthy eating when you were very young?
I believe that had something to do with it. I believe that I was fortunate enough that my dad was from Italy, and he did most of the cooking. So I've always eaten foods that were made from scratch.
Northern Italian or Southern Italian?
Northern Italian, actually. Central,
so
actually.
more cheeses and meats.
Yes, but we also had a lot of fish
Mediterranean.
and a lot of fresh vegetables and foods of that nature.
And did your food include olive oils?
Yes, it did.
It did?
All the time.
So it was like a combination of North and South?
Yes,
Northern and Southern
that's correct.
Italian. But you grew up here in the
I grew up
US.
here in the States.
Born and raised here?
Born and raised here, but Ben started taking trips over when I was 5 years old.
To which region?
To Italy, to Tuscany. Tuscany.
Oh, I see a lot of people, especially Americans, going to cooking classes in Tuscany. They go on a trip, and then it's combined with a cooking class.
That's true. Very true.
See, food itself is nutritious for people.
Mm-hmm.
Any food is healthy. Is that right? Is that a correct statement, or correct me?
Well, mostly any food that's grown is a healthy food. It just depends what you're going to do with it, and you can turn it into something phenomenal with not too much. You don't have to have that much of a chef background. You can make it very tasty with few ingredients.
In fact, especially those who have traveled around the world, they can tell you that food is prepared kind of in different ways with different spices around the world. And some of the northern colder regions cook with less salt, or with, I think with less salt. And the ones in the tropical areas and equatorial areas cook with more salt in their diet, if you noticed. And also spices vary. In Italy, in Italian cooking, what are the main spices used?
Main spices would be oregano, basil, parsley.
I see. And what are they good for?
Well,
Other than adding flavor.
it gives you a little heat. Some of the peppers from the south, in Naples and south, have the capsaicin in them.
I see.
It's a compound that they say, there's been some studies that say it can even keep cancer away,
Really?
supposedly.
Oh, everything seems to, I mean, everything from that region, like lemons and all these spices, for some reason they seem to keep cancer away, or so they claim.
Yes. And it seems that with studying that particular area, because I lived in Spain, southern Spain as well, and when the Arabs came over and took over, they brought their lemons with them and they brought their spices. And these spices have been around for thousands and thousands of years, and people have been cooking like this, and naturally they're important reasons. Because they really do help.
Are their spices different from the Italian spices?
Quite different.
What kind?
Well, in the Spanish, they don't use as much basil. They call it albahaca.
I see.
It actually comes from the Arabic word because it begins with al.
I see.
And it's used mainly more for beauty. They don't really cook with
Basil.
albahaca.
Okay.
I made the mistake myself when I went to the market. I would say, I would like to buy some albahaca, to cook with, and they couldn't understand why.
Yeah, they say nobody cooks with that because they are from a different region,
Yes,
although they are a neighbor
yes, that's
to
true.
Italy, basically.
And France also has different spices. They have more of the tarragon and the anise up
see.
there. Thyme.
And so what do those spices do, and how are they different from the Arabian spices or the Italian spices?
Well, I just think in general that they all have their benefits. They benefit the body. I think that's the reason why years ago on the spice market, the spice journey, that they were so costly and so expensive, because people realized it's like buying gold for the body.
I know. Well, those of us from India, we know history. The British took the spice road to India to get the spices from there. Then they found out that this country was so prosperous, and then they decided to take it over. And they did, just by way of trade,
Right.
Anyway, that's for another history lesson or a history show. Coming back to our food, can you tell me briefly what you told Sandra, but I know that was a whole hour program, but any salient points from that?
Well, basically, in a nutshell, we're just trying to point out what nutrient-dense foods to include in the diet so people can feel well. What are the best foods to choose, even in terms of salad greens, for example. Lettuce looks nice, it's attractive, but doesn't have
Nothing.
as
It
many
doesn't have
nutrients
anything, no.
as, let's say, dandelion
Yes.
or daikon root in there, or parsley and cilantro and watercress. I've come to the conclusion myself that I really don't buy lettuce anymore because I've been finding these other
So
greens
we're
that are
wasting
even
money on something that's not that nutritious.
not really. It's a filler, and there are still numerous Americans, I think, in the United States that haven't even gotten to the point of buying Boston lettuce or romaine.
Yeah.
They're still buying
The iceberg lettuce, which is the least
and
nutritious.
iceberg is least nutritious.
It's all water. If you want water to be hydrated, yeah, I think
Yes,
that's a good
yes,
way
that's
to go.
true.
On a hot summer day, that's good.
Right.
So, in terms of any other food, I mean, does it have to all be nutrient dense, or can it just be something that has certain nutrition and it'll be good to just take a little bit every day?
Yes, like for example, there's a particular dish that I make from your country called khichdi,
Khichdi,
which
yes.
which I make quite often.
What do you make it with?
And so what I do is I soak the mung beans 8 hours overnight, then I make my basmati rice,
Yeah.
and then I take a skillet and I put some olive oil in there, I put some garlic, some onions, I put in a variety of spices. I put in cumin and coriander and cardamom.
Turmeric?
And turmeric,
Turmeric.
exactly, because of the curcumin compound in there. And sometimes I look what else I may have in the refrigerator at the time. I may have some daikon. I put a little daikon root in there.
What is it good for? Daikon.
It's very, very good if you have any intestinal difficulties.
Oh, really?
Like ulcerative colitis. I have one particular client that I'm working with right now that suffers from ulcerative colitis. And I made some and I brought some over for her to try. And wow, she said, my gosh, what was that? It was very healing. I slept well. And she just felt it was very healing.
And we cook all the vegetables. I prepare South Indian vegetarian food. And daikon sambar is a very common everyday food item.
I believe it.
And that we cook with lentils.
That must be delicious.
Yeah, it is.
Here in the United States, we're just starting to understand a little bit about daikon. We're starting to see it on some of the menus.
Yeah.
Burdock is another one that I cook with.
I see. What is that?
Burdock comes like a long root, and the burdock is very, very good for blood cleansing and liver cleansing.
Oh, does it have a very distinct flavor?
It does have a
I
very
think it's called by another name in India.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
It has.
And how do you cook it? I mean, it doesn't cook into a pulp or anything, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Do you eat it raw?
I make some both ways. I make something called kimpura. And what I do with that is I'll julienne some carrots and julienne some burdock. And then I will saute it with a little bit of onion, garlic, and a little olive oil, a little bit of sea salt, and a little bit of tamari.
Yeah.
Just over the top, and quite delicious with a side of rice.
I see. The previous item you were talking about, the khichdi.
Yes.
And you said you soaked the moong dal. With the skin or without the skin?
With the skin.
With the skin, okay.
Yes.
And I know in the previous 1 hour live show you mentioned that a lot of the beans have to be soaked.
That's correct.
Can you explain that again?
Yes, the beans, with the exception of lentils, beluga lentils, regular brown lentils, red lentils, adzuki beans, and black-eyed peas. Those cook up fine without, don't have to be soaked. But the other ones do, because they contain phytates or phytic acid. And to decrease that, to make them more digestible, you put in a little postage size stamp of type of seaweed called kombu.
What does that do? Why
Kombu,
should you add that?
kombu makes it more digestible. So when
Really?
you eat the beans the following day, you don't have any difficulty with gas.
Gas or bloating or
some
anything,
people
yeah.
say, oh, we can't eat beans because they're so gassy. I think they have never really experienced having them soaked like that.
Yeah. I think when people understand the ingredients, understand the foods available like grains and lentils and vegetables and fruits, and know how to prepare them from ancient wisdom, I think people don't have any problems with, the gastric or any other troubles.
I'm in agreement with that. And I'd like to add to that I think what happens here is that people are on the go, so at lunchtime you see most Americans are grabbing something, and they don't even have a nice quiet lunch anymore. It's working and multitasking and grabbing a bite. There's no way that your body can possibly digest
Yeah, I've been in
properly.
corporate management myself. And very often I found all my other colleagues, the managers at my level, the senior vice presidents in that level, they used to go have lunch meetings with other professionals. And that is the worst thing to do when you're eating, because you really don't want that stress. But that's what all Americans are doing, and I just couldn't live like that for too long.
No, I was a little...
And I avoided those lunch scenes, but then you don't fit into their culture if you don't do that. I mean, if you look at a company and all the VPs are doing that, and then if one person doesn't want to go eat lunch with the others, they think it's something wrong with you. If you choose to bring your own food and eat it at the cafeteria with the other employees.
Yes, I can see where that might cause a little bit of a problem.
Yeah.
But
they are all not doing anything good for their bodies that way, right?
Right, because what happens is you're working under stress, you're eating under stress, you're nervous, you're worried, it doesn't work. There's no way you can digest. You have to be very calm, relaxing, maybe an environment where there's more plants, let's say, and maybe perhaps some water, trickling water, or some gentle music playing in the background. It needs to be looked at seriously, because it's gotten so out of hand that people nowadays, you don't hear about people eating breakfast, lunch, or dinner at the table anymore.
No. It's all on the go, even at home. Nobody really wants to sit down to eat. I mean, they would sit down, but in front of the TV or something. And they don't sit down in a group. It's as a family. Yeah.
Difficult for me to understand, because I've always eaten my breakfast, my lunch, and my dinner seated. Been fortunate enough to do that.
So do you enforce that in your family? Do you have everyone come and sit there and eat with you, or you just sit and eat by yourself?
Well, it is just myself right now. But I would, if I were involved with somebody, I would make a point to try to not have the television going on and cell phones, and it's not my philosophy. It doesn't fit with what I'm trying to promote.
In terms of the health and wellness, in addition to food, you're also into yoga?
Yes, that's
And
correct.
what other complementary field?
Well, basically, I believe in massage. I'm not a massage therapist, but I think everybody, at least once a month, should at least have a massage.
What kind?
Preferably Swedish, and also the points of the feet are very, very important. I myself find that when I'm under stress or I'm working, that my feet feel heavy and they feel tense. And so I try to work my feet myself, and you rub them with almond oil and a carrier oil, maybe like a little peppermint. Helps me sleep better.
Almond and what oil?
Almond oil would be the carrier, and then you can use a few drops.
Other fragrant oils. You can add to the almond oil.
A few drops of an essential oil, like a mint or a lavender or a little bit of eucalyptus. And
but then people have to be careful, because some of these essential oils, they're not all very mild, and some people are allergic to them. So they'll have to first test it.
Yes, that's very true.
Before adding to your carrier oil.
Very true, because we had a speaker up in Maine when I was the chef up there, and we had a lady come in with the essential oils, and she did some practice on us, and she put some basil oil that burned. It was very burning.
Oh, really?
And so I guess everybody, some of these can be a little potent.
Yeah. Coming back to the foods, have you experimented with other regions, of the world?
Yes.
Other than the European
Some
and a little bit of the Indian?
Some Asian.
Asian? What do you do? What is special about the Chinese or Japanese kind of food, especially in terms of tofu and soybean products. They eat it in a different way than we Americans
Yes, I'm glad that you brought
consume
that
them,
up.
right?
Very much so. A lot of people nowadays ask me about that. They'll say, oh, maybe I should be buying some tofu. And I say, well, fermented soy is the good one you want to buy.
But isn't tofu is not fermented?
Tofu is not really considered fermented,
I see.
but what you can do is, if you notice in the Japanese soups, they use very small little blocks of tofu, but very small amounts. So if you use tofu, I make, for example, an appetizer with basil and mint. It's rolled in rice paper.
Okay.
And it has the filling with a little bit of smoked tofu, but very, very thin little pieces with little carrot.
So you can't eat the big quantities that you're used to. You should take small pieces of those.
Small pieces.
And how do they consume it? What is it called? What do they make with the soy that's fermented?
The fermented in Indonesia, they work with tempeh. They make a lot of tempeh.
Okay.
So now I make tempeh Italian style. And it's quite interesting because I do a take on the bolognese sauce, which the meat bolognese, and I take the meat and I use the tempeh instead. And what I do is I saute a little bit of garlic, a little bit of jalapeno, then I'll saute a little bit of carrot, a little bit of celery, and then I grate. I grate the tempeh. And then I add the tempeh to the pan, stir fry that, add a little bit of sea salt. Then I add some quality whole peeled tomatoes to that. Add some capers, a little bit of red wine, and basil, little oregano. And then I will put that over some spelt. So I say spelt because I'm wheat intolerant.
I see.
I'm not gluten free. I can eat spelt. So I use the spelt pasta, or else you can take this bolognese.
So what is it made of? What grain?
It's made out of the spelt. It's called spelt. It's an ancient grain.
Okay.
Cousin to the wheat family, but an older grain.
But it makes like harder, kind of heavier kind of breads, right?
Yes, and also the rotini pasta, sometimes I put it over that. Use it as like a thick sauce. Or you can take this tempeh that I'm mentioning and stuff it into a pepper.
I see. In the 1 hour live show, you also mentioned about some foods that you should avoid or have, in terms of taking care of your ligaments and joints and those. Could you say something about that?
Yes, the nightshade. If you're arthritic, for example, you really have to be careful of your citrus. Your citrus, grapefruit, orange, for example, and also the nightshade foods such as eggplant and pepper and tomato and potato.
I see.
Can cause some difficulties
because of some chemicals in them.
Because it tends to make the joints very difficult, and it causes a lot of pain.
Yeah,
it causes inflammation.
Especially, I think, in the old way of cultivating these tomatoes and eggplants, they use the actual plants, but then those plants used to only last a part of the season, and they'll die out. So the farmers have started putting them with the stock plants, which are actual nightshade plants.
Yes.
And then they're adding it and grafting them to have more production and to make sturdier plants. And now all of these vegetables grown in these kind of stock, in these plants, they seem to have more of this chemical that is causing problems for people's knees and cartilages and ligaments and everything.
And the genetically modified that's coming up will be not so cheery either.
And that would be even worse. We only have about 3 minutes. I want to tell our viewers, what kind of article you wrote for this publication, this newsletter. It's called The Good Word. See, The Good Word.
I wrote one called Nutrient-Dense Foods to Include in the Diet.
I see.
and try to share with everybody some of the products that I feel are important,
Yeah.
including lacto-fermented vegetables.
Nice.
Which
What is that? What is a lacto-fermented vegetable?
Lacto-fermented is basically when you take cabbage, or I use cabbage, sometimes I change it out, but I make my own. I take a half a head of cabbage and I chiffonade it very finely. I put it in a bowl. I put a little bit of minced garlic, a little bit of minced ginger, and some onions, and then I pound it down to get all the liquid out. I put a tablespoon of salt, and then I mix it all together, and I put it in a mason jar, and with about an inch from the top to let it breathe, and
Because I thought I thought you put milk or something.
No,
or
not at all.
Yogurt.
It sits out on the counter for 3 days
I see.
without refrigeration.
I see.
And
it doesn't spoil.
It tastes pickled. It tastes
I
pickled.
see.
People think it tastes like it
I
has
see.
vinegar,
Oh, that
but
sounds
that's lacto-fermented.
Yeah, and the good word. This is available, I think, in any store, and you can pick it up for free anywhere in the Danbury area. I'm just giving that information for our viewers so that if they are interested, they can pick up this newsletter.
Absolutely.
So we just have a minute left, and I know there's a lot I want to ask again about what are the good oils to use in our cooking and what to avoid.
Yes, the oils to
Or the fats,
include.
what fats to avoid.
Fats, okay. The monosaturated oil, their best one is to go with an olive oil.
I see.
And coconut oil. And then there's red palm oil.
So just a decade ago or 2 decades ago, the researchers and scientists said coconut and palm oil are bad because they're saturated oil, they're bad for your heart. And now they've made an about turn, and now they're saying it's good for us, right?
That's correct.
Okay, it looks like our time is up. And thank you so much. I know talking to you, the time just flew.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
It was a
much,
pleasure.
Ilia, Regini. And that was Ilia, Regini. For those of you watching at home, thank you all for watching. And until next time, goodbye.